The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the most confusing and somewhat frustrating experiences I have ever played, because after playing the game for an approximate total of 3 times, it took me forever to decide if the game is good or not. This probably isn't a surprising claim due to the polarizing nature of the story, because a lot of people have a lot of different issues with this game. The discourse for this game is so bad that people are still talking about this game today and debating if it's good or not. It's ridiculous. Some of the issues that people had with the game are insane, and I feel like a lot of the crazy chimp brain critiques of the game, like women shouldn't be this strong, have drowned out more valid critiques that need to be put to light. Because for this game, with every moment of greatness I see, comes a moment where I wish the story took a vastly different direction. Hopefully this video can at least build some sympathy for people who are unsure about the supposed game of the year, because for me and a lot of other people, the choice left us scratching our heads. My confusion starts and builds with the game's intro, because I absolutely loved it. As I was playing the first 2 scenes of the game, my worries about a sequel to the first Last of Us melted away. When the game was revealed, I was immediately skeptic. This isn't just an Uncharted game that you can crank out sequels to like Fast and Furious. There was a genuineness to The Last of Us that handles its characters with love, care, and affection, and those very things were present in the opening. It showed that these were the characters we loved, and that they were in their element. This relief continued until the first big moment where Joel dies and Ellie's world is completely shaken and destroyed. When she sets off on her mad quest for revenge, the game loses its heart and soul and never seems to find itself again. If we are just going to jump right in, the most prominent issue with the game is the relationship between the characters and the plot. This is something that is rarely discussed among fans, yet it is an integral part of why this game should be critiqued. In fact, The Last of Us Part 2 struggles so much with this balance of plot and characters that it ultimately breaks a story at times is told in a very elegant way. Don't get me wrong, there are many plot points and set pieces that I found to be completely enjoyable for a multitude of reasons. For example, the museum flashback is one of the best scenes in the entire game because of its deep focus on the characters we know and love. I started to grasp at the deep character interactions, and I started liking the game again, because this is where The Last of Us was at its strongest. But then it moves on, and we get back to the main game. And I quickly realized that the points in which the game excels and matches the level of quality in those first 2 scenes of the game are few and far between. While this may seem like I am complaining about a lack of Joel and Ellie, this is not the case. Rather, Joel and Ellie's relationship represents a much-needed element that is missing from the final game. That element being interesting character interaction and relationships, as well as interesting character growth. Instead, we get a plot-centric tale of revenge that has the potential to be a great sequel. A lot of people give this game crap because the game presents you with new information to change your perspective on already established events. But I've played many games in the past where this is done successfully. Where this game fails is that the plot lacks personal situations and moments. Because instead of the plot reflecting characters' actions and presenting moral dilemmas, the plot is reflecting one thing, the message that it is trying to present. Like the game that came before it, the message is simple. Forgiveness and compassion are the only good ways to deal with being wronged. This message is the game's central focus. And what a game makes its central focus is very important. For BioShock, it is the atmosphere and setting of Rapture. For Persona, it's the characters and the time you get to spend with them. For Fallout, it's the open world and unique quests. Each of these games listed focuses on specific aspects and excels in it. Yet I can't help but feel like The Last of Us Part 2 built itself and focused on the wrong thing. Each moment feels like it is only about what the game is trying to tell you, and it is very forward about it. For example, Ellie slogs through a seemingly endless journey, killing as many people as possible. Multiple times, Ellie goes out of her way to be as violent and cruel as possible. A brutal display of violence in the game, especially from Ellie's side, is meant to show futility. Each moment is masterfully geared around this feeling, but I can't help but feel like this was a mistake. The mistake is that there's rarely anything other than this feeling. Ellie is geared around not understanding or changing, which is frustrating from a player and story perspective. This isn't just Ellie either. It might be excusable for one character, but this happens to every single character in a similar fashion. Characters aren't really given room to breathe, and when they are, the game excels. This is what makes Abby's dynamic with Lev and Abby's dynamic with Owen the best relationships in the game. Other than flashbacks, the game seems to rush past things that it should be taking its time on. You can immediately tell the difference between the flashbacks and the rest of the game, because the flashbacks are so focused on the characters and their relationships with each other that they make the best part of the game and the most interesting parts of the story. In fact, very little of the game that we all played through is character focused, despite the plot being a very personal plot. This is shocking to me because it feels like the game's focus has completely flipped. The Last of Us built a message from its characters, but Part 2 is building characters from its message.
Okay.
For example, Ellie never realizes what Joel's perspective is. Neither did she ever realize that she was just like Abby, only further behind in her coping process, a compassionless Abby. She does not even have that much growth with Dina, her girlfriend, throughout the game. Instead, we mostly see destinations without the adversity, wondering how we got there. Their biggest changes in their relationship happen at the very beginning of the game, the time skips that are present throughout the story, and the very end. For most of the game, nothing happens between them, and Dina is completely sidelined after a fight and pregnancy. The game starts with their relationship being established, then after a quick get-together, Joel's death swiftly happens. A short time skip happens in which they are closer, yet we don't ever get to witness how or why. The only time I felt intrigued in their relationship is when the game finally put them through a challenge, Dina's pregnancy. I audibly said finally when they were faced with adversity, as it was finally a chance for some character growth and development. However, the issue gets resolved quickly in a very cheap way. The issues between these two are ignored until something happens to fix it, which makes the entire game feel like it's stuck in neutral. Subplots end suddenly, characters die left and right before any real resolution is offered, Owen dies before any resolution with Abby is reached, Mel dies hating Abby, Tommy ends the game in a bitter rage, Jesse gets mad at Ellie at the issue magically disappears. Every character conflict in this game ends with no resolution. Even Ellie's main character arc is not immune to this issue. In fact, she is the chief offender. Take Ellie's overarching character throughout the game. She gets shaken up by her murder spree, attempts to kill Abby anyway, but does not kill her because she finally pictures Joel at peace. This is some sort of development, but it is stretched so thin across the game, a 25-hour journey, that her character falls flat. I only cared about her so much because I crossed America in search of the Fireflies with her in the previous game, as where the sequel takes her character just is not compelling to me. I would love to hear an explanation as to why Ellie let Abby go. There are a multitude of possible answers, but the game never gives a definitive reason, which leaves the player to fill in the gaps. To me, Ellie didn't actually feel like she ever grew. It felt like she had a random memory that popped up at an important time. I was confused. Why did Ellie picture Joel in this moment? There's no satisfying explanation that I could think of. Looking back on it, Ellie's half had a lot more issues than things I liked, which is shocking to me considering that most players have beef with the last half of the game, which I believe is the stronger part of the game, because Abby is a different beast entirely. She has different strengths and weaknesses to her characters and stories. She gets more growth and I believe is a stronger character overall, but it took me 3 playthroughs to see it. On my first playthrough, I felt like the game failed at making the player care for her, and this was due to 2 things. Number 1, she killed Joel, which was my favorite character from the first game, and so that's a hard sell. Number 2 is that her journey parallels Joel, yet it is a vastly inferior version of the same conflict and character growth. While I still think these things are true, only upon replaying the game does Abby's story have any effect on me emotionally. It was then I realized that Abby was a better character than Ellie in almost every way. She gets some form of growth, she gets a redemption arc, and her natural progression makes sense. For the most part. Lev was also a great character due to his struggles with his family and his history with the Severites. However, not every aspect of Abby's story is great. In fact, there are quite a few issues that I do have with the second half of the game. The first is the supporting cast around her. Mel, Isaac, Nora, Yara, and worst of all, Manny are either unlikable or characters that amount to wasted potential. Especially Isaac. You have Forrest Whitaker behind a character who, throughout the game, is rumored to be a brutal, ruthless warmonger who has risen to the top of the WLF. only for him to be in 2 scenes and then get shot in the back and die. If Isaac was removed from the game, very little of the plot would change, and that's very disappointing to me. Owen was the only side character that deserved any screen time at all, and that's saying something considering he's both a cheater and a liar. Second, Abby seems removed from the game. What we got in the second half of the game was interesting and unique, but the game was forcibly moved away from Ellie's side, and it happened unnaturally. For most of my time as Abby, all I wanted to do was fight Abby at the theater. To be more specific, playing as Abby is fine, but the way that the game goes about doing it is not fine. The momentum reset that we witness creates some issues for personal investment in the story. It would have been better for both sides to happen at once, day by day, interwoven. In my third playthrough, I started to like Abby and the world of Seattle so much that part of me wishes that the second part of this game was a spin-off. I began to be interested in her problems and relationships, only for us to get dragged down by Ellie's intrusion into her life. This may be the entire point of the game, but it still doesn't make for a satisfying experience for the player. By the time that I got back to that aquarium on the final day, I was frustrated that I had to return to Ellie's story, which was almost unconnected to Abby's until then. Third, she also suffers from a lack of character development in certain areas. While thankfully she does grow, she never truly realizes that Ellie is who she was for most of her life. The player realizes this, but the game acts like the characters have the same revelations that the player does without committing to showcasing their growth, which isn't a good way to tell a story, because it makes you feel disconnected from the characters. I may have seen what makes Abby deserve to be saved, but Ellie hasn't. That's why her salvation at the end is so confusing. Here's what I'm trying to say. The game never goes deeper than presenting you with 2 sides of a conflict. None of these characters learn to resent what they have become, which would have been a key factor in telling the story well. It's Abby's own words that made me realize this.
You killed my friends. We let you both live, and you wasted it.
We let you live and you wasted it. Up until now, the game makes it clear that she hasn't learned her lesson. She still thinks that Ellie has wasted her life in revenge of a just act that Abby committed, when the lesson of the game is that revenge is never just. Abby's character is incomplete, and sadly so. This makes the ending of the game lose impact for me in 2 ways. I was less compelled towards Ellie's growth, and I was unconvinced by Abby's. So if I had to wrap up what I've been trying to discuss in one neat little statement, it is this. The game does not focus on character storytelling enough, and when it does, it is uncompelling. Because compelling character storytelling comes from changes in motivation, changes in beliefs, and changes in action. Both Ellie and Abby fail at this in their own respective ways. But most of all, the game's biggest sin, by far, was its missed potential. For me, it belongs in a category of a shallow experience, which is something that I never thought I would say. What we got was not terrible, but at the best, it was a shadow of what could be. It's like an IGN 8 out of 10. It could have been a game focused on Joel and Ellie's relationship going forward, but we only get glimpses in a summarized version of this. Instead, we got a game that explores the impact of Abby killing Joel, but the literal one line of good dialogue about this is thrown aside and never talked about again.
Oh yeah, how do I do that? Should I go find the people that killed my family? Cut into them? I could torture them until they're crying, you know? Abby.
Imagine if Abby had a heartfelt conversation with Lev about what she has done, and it allows them to become closer. Imagine if Ellie talked to somebody about her relationship problems with Joel. If you want a deep and profound story, your dialogue needs to match the depth to it as well. This is done masterfully in other forms of media. Red Dead Redemption 2's story is special because of Arthur's character change as the world he once knew crumbles around him. He must come to terms that he wasted his life and does his best to change in what little time he has left. In God of War, Kratos must guide his son away from the traps that he fell into, as Atreus is blissfully unaware of his true nature and struggles once he learns it. These are just 2 examples, but I can go on and on about stories with deep, meaningful reflection and growth. But comparing the story we got for The Last of Us Part 2 with the others that I just mentioned makes it painfully clear that there's a severe lack of meaningful character development. Instead, Abby and Ellie both find redemption, but never seem to be able to justify why. Abby comes to terms with killing Joel, her relationship with Owen, and Ellie killing all of her friends, but this seems to happen magically by the events around her. She never once reflects on her past actions. Ellie comes to terms with Abby killing Joel, yet it is unclear as to why. Events take place in this game, and we are expected to follow why this changes the characters. Yet Ellie continues to do the same thing, with only reflection on the past and not the present. She is very clearly destroying herself, but she never takes the time to change her actions until the story demands that she does. To top it off, certain people like to parade this story around like it is a revolutionary look at two humans interacting. I hate to break it to people who think this, but the concept of the perception of another person and how it relates to the cognizant self has been discussed for literally hundreds of years. Philosophers have talked about the other since the beginning of the 19th century. While this doesn't mean that the game can't have those themes, the game acts like it invented this thought by giving us the most shallow baseline ideas of what it means to other someone. To look across the room, acknowledge someone, and have your identity shaped by them. The intricacies of this relationship in this game has been boiled down to where does the cycle of violence end? And it makes me really sad to say that. Look, my discussion so far about the game has been overwhelmingly negative. While my impressions of the story and characters are more or less that, pretty much every other aspect of the game was a positive experience for me. The music was incredible. It achieved the tone it was trying to set. The visuals and graphics were unlike anything I have seen before. In and out of cutscenes.
Don't jump. Just climb down. Hey!
Oh, did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh, wasn't it awesome?
It's awesome that you didn't break anything.
That was awesome.
The combat was good, although it did get tiring by the end of the game. For the most part, the game's encounters were enjoyable, and I was tense with every WLF patrol and Sephirite ambush. The fight with the Rat King was genuinely one of the most terrifying experiences I have had in a video game, and destroying that abomination gave me a sincere feeling of victory. But here's the big caveat. I played The Last of Us Part 2 for the story and the characters. Nothing else. In the first game, the story keeps the gameplay afloat, and I kept going not because I wanted to encounter another group of infected or warped humans, but because I wanted to get Ellie to safety, because I cared about our two main characters. In the second game, it expects the player to have Ellie's bloodlust flipped around, and it motivates you to keep killing over and over and over again for the sake of killing. And it saddens me to say that no such motivation ever existed for me, which made the entire message of the game fall flat. In conclusion, the most disappointing aspect of this game was the characters, and it is truly shocking that a sequel to The Last of Us struggles with this. Characters do not grow properly, and when they do, it is frustratingly taken away from you in a dumbass story decision that happens hours later. I did not hate this game, but it could have been so much more. If Naughty Dog shifted the focus back to the characters and away from the plot, it could have been something truly special. But the current plot is hardly enough to sustain the sequel's existence. The story is like a broken plate. Parts are whole and clean, and you can see the shiny potential of the pieces, but a broken plate is still useless for holding any form of substance.